There is a moment that many baby boomers know well, though few have ever named it out loud. Someone offers to help carry the groceries. A family member suggests they move closer into a spare bedroom down the hall. A friend insists on driving them to the appointment. And before the offer is even finished, the answer is already forming. No, no, I'm fine, don't bother. Not because they don't need the help. Sometimes they do. But something older than logic steps in first. A quiet reflex that says, do not ask too much. Do not take up too much room. Do not become someone else's burden. This is not stubbornness. It is not pride in the way most people mean the word. It is something installed so early and reinforced so consistently that it no longer feels like a choice. It feels like character. This video is about that reflex, where it came from, what it protected, what it costs, and why understanding it might be one of the most honest things a person can do at this stage of life. Watch carefully, and you begin to see it everywhere. The retired woman who reorganizes the kitchen before her daughter visits, not because it needs reorganizing, but because she cannot bear to be seen as someone who has let things slide. The man who insists on fixing the leaking faucet himself for 3 weeks rather than ask his son-in-law to take a look. The grandmother who eats whatever is put in front of her at family dinners, never mentioning that she no longer tolerates certain foods, because saying so would create inconvenience. These moments look different on the surface, but underneath they share the same logic. I will manage myself in a way that costs others nothing. For many baby boomers, this management has become so automatic that they no longer notice they are doing it. They trim their needs before expressing them. They frame requests as non-requests. They apologize preemptively, almost reflexively. I don't want to be a bother. You have enough going on. I'll figure it out. And when someone does insist on helping, there is often a flicker of something uncomfortable, not just reluctance, something closer to guilt, as though receiving care is a small failure, as though being helped means they have taken something that did not belong to them. This feeling is not random. It has a history. People who study generational psychology often focus on the dramatic events, the wars, the protests, the economic crises, but some of the most formative shaping happens not in headline moments, but in the ordinary texture of daily life, in what was said at the dinner table, in what was never said at all. For baby boomers who grew up in the 1950s and early 1960s, the household emotional culture had a particular grammar. Feelings were managed privately. Needs were expressed carefully, if at all. There was deep dignity attached to handling one's own affairs, to not unraveling in front of others, to solving problems before anyone else had to witness them. The adults who raised baby boomers had learned, at a cellular level, that resources were finite, that depending on others was a risk, and that the safest position was one of self-sufficiency. They passed this forward, not as a lesson, but as an atmosphere. A child raised in that atmosphere absorbs something specific, that the people around you have limits, that your needs compete with those limits, and that the most loving thing you can do is ask as little as possible. For boys in that era, strength was demonstrated through silence. A man who expressed pain, uncertainty, or need was understood to be failing at something fundamental. These boys grew into men who became deeply competent at managing difficulty and deeply uncomfortable at acknowledging it. For girls, the message came differently, but landed in a similar place. Femininity was bound up with caregiving, with attentiveness to others, with the quiet labor of keeping things smooth. To have needs of one's own was somehow a departure from this. Her own needs were secondary, expressed indirectly if at all. Two different cultural instructions, the same psychological destination, a self that has learned to take up as little room as possible. Then the 1970s arrived, and the ground shifted. Many baby boomers, particularly those born in the late 1950s and early 1960s, came of age in a decade when the stable world their parents had promised began coming apart. Inflation climbed, unemployment rose, Fathers who had worked the same job for 20 years found themselves out of work. Mothers who had expected to remain home entered the workforce out of necessity rather than choice. It showed up in households as tension, as silence, as the careful rationing of wants. Children learned to read the atmosphere, to calibrate when they could ask for something and when they could not. Many learned simply to ask less. What happened to those families economically also shaped something deeper, the sense that security was fragile, that prosperity was not guaranteed, and that drawing too much from the available pool of money, of attention, of parental patience was a real risk. Not asking became a form of protection. If you never asked, you were never refused. If you never needed, you were never a burden. Or if you took up less space, you were safer from the particular pain of being told there was not enough room for you. This is the psychological root of what looks, decades later, like modesty or independence or quiet stoicism. It is those things, but it is also something that formed under pressure. There is a specific pattern that shows up when this generation enters its 60s and 70s, and it tends to surprise the adult children who encounter it. A parent sells the family home, a home they have lived in for 30 years, and moves to a smaller apartment. When asked why, they say it is practical. The children suspect something else is going on, some financial pressure that is not being named, but every attempt to ask directly is deflected. "I'm fine, I made the decision, don't worry about it." A father has a minor health scare. He goes to the appointment alone, waits for the results alone, and tells no one until the situation is resolved, mentioning it almost in passing, as an afterthought. His children are hurt. He is confused by their hurt. He was handling it. What was there to burden them with before there was something definite to say? A woman finds herself sitting in a chair at her daughter's house, surrounded by people who love her, and feels, underneath all of it, a persistent low-level discomfort, a sense of taking up space. She is not certain she has earned. None of these people are performing. They are simply living inside a set of reflexes so deeply established that they feel indistinguishable from personality. What the people around them often misread as distance or stubbornness is actually something more tender, a long-established system for keeping oneself from becoming too much. But here is what that system built, before we name what it cost. The self-sufficiency that came from not asking, from learning to handle things alone, is genuinely formidable. Baby boomers as a generation developed a particular kind of capability that is not performative, not theoretical. It was built in real conditions, under real pressure, through actual repetition. The woman who managed the household finances alone because there was no one else. The man who figured out the job application on his own because there was no counselor, no parent available to help. The person who navigated a difficult diagnosis, a difficult marriage, a difficult decade, not by reaching out, but by drawing inward and moving through. This is the kind of resilience that holds families together, that keeps organizations functioning during crises, that simply gets things done when getting things done is what is required. The generation that built things when conditions were difficult, that showed up when showing up was hard, built something real. The not asking was part of what made that possible, but capability built on self-erasure carries a hidden weight. The reflex that made someone reliable in their 40s and 50s begins to work differently in their 60s and 70s. The world around them changes in ways that the reflex was not designed to accommodate. Adult children want to help. Partners want to be let in. Doctors need accurate information about how someone is actually feeling, not the managed version. Friends want the conversation to go deeper than surface-level practicality. And the person who learned to ask nothing, to be the one who holds rather than the one who is held, finds themselves in a very specific way unreachable, not because they do not have feelings, not because they do not sometimes want to be held, but because the pathway from "I need something" to "I will say so out loud" was closed off so early and kept closed for so long that it has become genuinely difficult to locate. The need is there. The access to expressing it is not always there with it. This is the loneliness that does not announce itself. It does not look like loneliness from the outside. It looks like self-sufficiency. What it feels like from the inside, for some members of this generation, is a persistent distance, not from others, exactly, but from the parts of themselves that would allow others to fully arrive. Children sometimes describe a parent they love deeply as hard to reach. They do not mean geographically. They mean that there is a layer of the person that stays managed, that stays contained, that never quite opens. This is not the parent withholding something. This is a person who learned so thoroughly that needing is dangerous, that they cannot always find the switch. There is also a version of this that emerges specifically around the transition to older age. For many baby boomers, the identity of the capable one, the person others leaned on, who knew what to do, who provided, is not just a role. It is a deep part of how they understand themselves. When that role begins to shift, when the body becomes less reliable, when the family dynamic gradually inverts, and children begin offering the kind of help that used to flow in the other direction, the adjustment required is significant. The reflex to minimize, to insist nothing has changed, to deflect care before it can arrive, becomes its own obstacle. The person who cannot say, "I could use some help with this," is not being difficult. They are protecting an identity that has kept them upright for decades. Accepting help can feel like the first step toward becoming someone who always needs help, as though the boundary, once crossed, cannot be recovered. This fear is understandable. It is also in most cases not accurate. Asking for something specific, in a specific moment, does not mean surrendering the self, but when the reflex is old enough and strong enough, the distinction can be very hard to feel. What is worth sitting with, not as a correction but as a quiet consideration, is this: the people in your life who want to help you are not calculating the cost. They are not keeping a ledger. When a child offers to drive, when a friend insists on staying a little longer, when a partner asks to be told how something is really going, they are not doing it out of obligation. They are doing it because you matter to them. The reflex that says "don't be a burden" was built in a world where resources were genuinely limited, where the adults around you were genuinely stretched, where taking up space did carry a real risk. That world made sense of the reflex. But many baby boomers now live in a different context. The people around them are not stretched in the same way. The resources being offered are not scarce, and the taking up of space that once felt risky is in this moment something that the people who love them are actively asking for. Letting someone carry something with you is not the same as losing what makes you who you are. The strength that carried you this far does not disappear because you allow someone else to stand beside it. The generation that was told to be strong, to manage, to need nothing, was told that by people who were themselves trying to be strong, who had themselves been told the same thing a generation before. It is a long inheritance. It produced remarkable people. It also produced a particular kind of loneliness that goes unnamed because the people who carry it are by training very good at carrying things quietly. Understanding that the reflex is there, that it formed for real reasons in real conditions, is not the same as being ruled by it. Recognizing the shape of a learnt behavior is the first step toward deciding consciously when it still serves you and when it costs more than it gives. This is not about dismantling something that took a lifetime to build. It is about knowing what you built and why, and what you might want to do with that knowledge now. If this reflection touched something you recognize in yourself or in someone you love, the comment section is an open space. What did this generation learn about asking for help, and how has that shaped things? The most honest answers are usually the most useful ones. If this kind of content speaks to you, consider staying with the channel. There is more to examine here, and it is worth examining slowly, carefully, and without judgment,